IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Habitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. We are a movement of more than 20,000 people here in Israel, including many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense Establishment. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into these war briefings. I'm pleased to be joined today by the one and only Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, the IDF spokesperson. For those of you keeping a close eye on what is happening during this war, Jonathan is certainly no stranger to you. As the spokesperson for the IDF in Israel, representing Israel in the international media, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Moshe. A pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I know that since the outbreak of the war, you have been working tirelessly for Israel. It's an honor to have you. What can you share with us in terms of an update that is happening right now in this war?
Well, it's a pleasure to be back here. We did a webinar, I think it was 2 months ago, when the IDSF started doing daily and weekly briefings, and much has changed since then. I know that the last briefing that our audience here probably was given was Thursday. So let's summarize the main events, and actually quite a lot has happened since Thursday. Even though we're more than 3 months into fighting, there's a few interesting and very, very troublesome developments that I think we should all be focusing on. One, and the obvious, is what's happening in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, and the growing level of tension and aggression from Hezbollah towards Israel. Hezbollah has been escalating its efforts for weeks now. We see a steady incline in the amount of attacks, in the severity of the weapons that have been used, in the range of rockets, drones, and UAVs that have been fired from Lebanon towards Israel. And 3 days ago, a significant escalation, 2.5 days ago, a significant escalation by Hezbollah when they fired towards an important military infrastructure in northern Israel on top of Mount Meron with long-range missiles and rockets. They were able to damage that facility, which is now being, of course, amended and fixed. But that was a clear sign of escalation from Hezbollah. They claim, which I think is a very thinly disguised lie, that they claim that this was in response for the elimination of Salah Harouri, a Hamas senior who was killed in Beirut, even though Salah Harouri is not Shiite, is not Lebanese, and has no formal affiliation with Hezbollah. Hezbollah, for some reason, thinks that it's a wise and good thing to do to drag Lebanon into war, or the possibility of doing so, by attacking Israel and escalating as they are doing. I think that what Israel is now doing, the IDF on the ground, still deployed with significant military capabilities up along the northern border. We're talking about 3, 4, and 5 times as many soldiers as we would have in regular times before October 7, even more than that. And in terms of combat capabilities, much more. Tanks, aircraft, UAVs, artillery, of course, logistics, intelligence collection, and all of the support infrastructure, all of that is deployed up in the north. And as weeks have gone by, the IDF has added more and more capabilities. Some of them are on standby, focused on the north, and some of them have already been deployed up north. So we're seeing Hezbollah aggressing. We're seeing Hezbollah violating Resolution 1701, which now, sadly today, is, I think, only an empty shell. It exists as a resolution, as a UN Security Council Resolution 1701. But beyond that, unfortunately, sadly, not much more. It has been hollowed out very effectively by Hezbollah. Had 1701 been in effect today and been actually implemented on the ground, we wouldn't have been in the situation that we are now, and there wouldn't have been more than 100,000 Israeli people displaced from their homes in northern Israel. The fact of the matter is that 1701 was put in place after the Second Lebanon War exactly to prevent what we are facing now. And as we are speaking, there are still very serious and high-level diplomatic efforts conducted by the US, supported by France, and with certain support by the UN and other entities, in order to try to get the message across to Hezbollah. And what's the message? This will end in either one of two ways. Either Israeli civilians go back to their homes, be on our side of the established international border or the blue line, live in their homes without Hezbollah threat. They go back doing that either if there is a diplomatic solution and Hezbollah is pushed away from the border, or if it's created by the IDF. This war cannot end, and Israeli civilians will not be able to go back to their homes without one of those two solutions happening. And what Israel has been saying quite clearly and consistently is the best option for everybody involved, specifically the Lebanese state and Lebanese civilians and those who care about them, would be for Hezbollah to do the smart thing and move back by itself. And that is where we are now. Israel is still giving the opportunity for diplomacy, for international diplomacy to run its course and to deliver, so that we won't have to use kinetics, basically use the military options that we have at our disposal. That is where we are now. But we're seeing Hezbollah indicating that they're escalating. Just a few hours ago, there's a report of a senior Hezbollah commander that was killed in southern Lebanon. I'm sure that will have ramifications as well. But all in all, we're looking at a very combustible situation up north, where Israel is still defending itself against Hezbollah's violations. Hezbollah is in violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, a systemic, continuous violation. And so far, Israel is hoping and trying and allowing for the diplomatic players to do their part, and hopefully that will be successful. If not, of course, the IDF is ready, prepared, drilled, equipped, etc., to carry out and implement what it needs to do in order to facilitate for Israeli civilians to go back home. So that's where we stand along the northern border. Of course, there's activities happening in Syria as well. There's Iranian proxies that are kind of positioning themselves. We see them forwarding equipment and perhaps firing positions. The IDF is monitoring that. And we are monitoring, the IDF is monitoring everything that Hezbollah is doing in southern Lebanon, whether it is in south of the Litani, and of course Beirut, the Dahya area, and also Baalbek, and many of the other known Hezbollah strongholds. So that continues. In the south, in Gaza, for the first time, Israeli officials have said that we are now moving into another new stage of operations. What does that mean on the ground? It means that in the northern part of Gaza, the IDF has achieved effective control above ground, and it is working slowly, carefully, meticulously in order to dismantle all of Hamas infrastructure in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And every day that goes by, Israeli troops uncover weapons storage facilities, large weapons manufacturing facilities, weapons hidden in schools, in mosques, and of course, lots and lots of Hamas terrorists are killed, many surrender, and many of them also deliver quite important intelligence that Israeli intelligence officials are able to extract on the battlefield, and then that provides very good and useful, actionable intelligence for the Israeli soldiers to continue to operate. And that is happening in the north, and in the south and in the central. We are still in higher intensity operations, of course, not as intense as they were 2, 3, or maybe 4 weeks ago, but significant fighting. And the IDF continues to peel away layer after layer of Hamas military infrastructure to kill military commanders and to constantly apply pressure on Hamas leadership, and to constantly look for, and wherever there is an opportunity, to take out senior Hamas military leaders. Unfortunately, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif are still alive. I hope that their days are very short and that soon the IDF will be able to take them out and deliver a decisive blow to Hamas and the senior military leadership. And I think that that is only a matter of time before the joint efforts of the IDF, the Israeli Air Force as the executor, and the ISA, Shabak, generating intelligence, together with all of the other components of the IDF, special forces on the ground, will be able to finally get either our hands on or our bombs on Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and many of the other senior Hamas leaders. Basically, what you could call this current stage of operations in Gaza would be that we are advancing, we are searching and destroying. Searching for enemy infrastructure. When we find it, we document, we investigate, we collect intelligence, and then destroy. That is what the troops are doing on the ground now. Some soldiers, like the Golani Brigade and Givati and many other regular units, have been fighting since October 7th. And what the IDF is now doing is also alleviating some of the pressure from the reserve units, bringing them out, allowing men who have been fighting, and some women as well, but mostly men who have been fighting, some R&R, rest and recreation, to get back home, to see their families, perhaps to tend to financial matters, and also to rest and to prepare for the next stages of operations, whether that will be in the south or, as I spoke about, the northern front with Hezbollah. Israel needs to be ready and prepared for any such eventuality, and the IDF will have to have its forces ready for such a development as well. To conclude, I think that we can say with confidence that the troop morale, from as far as I've been able to understand and see in the people that I speak with on the ground, the fighters, the commanders, and the officers, troop morale is high. The understanding of what needs to be done is very clear, even amongst the rank and file and everybody that is participating in the fighting. Our combat troops understand, and all of the IDF understands, that there is a long and difficult task ahead, a task that will need, or it will call for, continued determination, continued focus, continued discipline, and activity according to the rules of engagement and according to our values as a Jewish and democratic country, with values that we have fought for over a long time. And our troops continue to operate in that manner and according to the laws of armed conflict, and that is ongoing. And I think that what we're seeing is a very professional and successful effort, all in all, by the IDF, which will continue for the foreseeable time until we're able to dismantle all of Hamas infrastructure in the south, and should it be necessary, commence fighting not only defensive operations up north. That is the situation. If we zoom out just shortly, Iran continues to expose itself to the world for what it really is. And I think that for every day that goes by, more and more people will find it very difficult not to see what Iran is doing. Iran is the reason, is the puppet master, and the source of so much of Middle Eastern instability. And every day that goes by, every attack by the Houthis that are firing at international merchant vessels in international waters, every day that Iran fires at American bases in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, and every day that Iran provides weapons to the Houthis and to Iranian militias in Syria and in Yemen and Iraq, and of course Hezbollah in Lebanon, it is clear for anybody that is honest enough to see and understand who is really behind all of this violence and bloodshed. It definitely isn't Israel, it is Iran. And I think it is about high time that we focus the discussion of who really is behind this violence and what needs to be done in order to address that violence, that source of violence in the future. So I think that's a general summary of where we stand now. I think we have questions lined up, right, Moshe?
Yes, absolutely. Jonathan, thank you for that very thorough briefing on all the different fronts. I want to ask you some questions about your experience with the international media, but before that, let's focus a little bit on some of these different fronts. And looking north at Lebanon and Hezbollah, What is the motivation of Hezbollah to attack Israel or to withhold? Are they just a puppet of Iran? Are they worried about the Lebanese people uprising? Like, what's going to make or break the escalation in the north?
That's a very prominent question and very relevant now. And I think that we all have to be very careful when we assess enemy intentions and when we try to understand enemy thinkings and calculations, or how the enemy thinks and how they calculate their things. I think we should all be very modest and careful, especially after the horrible failures and shortcomings of October the 7th. My understanding, and again, I say this with a lot of humility, I'm not an intelligence expert. I've just read a lot of reports and have had some personal acquaintance or familiarity with Hezbollah. I think that Hezbollah find themselves between in a pretty uncomfortable situation. On one hand, they are now outdone. They have been outdone in the axis of evil and in the world of crazy, vicious and barbaric terrorists, which they belong to. They are contenders for the top position, but there are many other contenders. And for the time being, sadly, Hamas have outdone Hezbollah in terms of barbarity and in terms of killing Jews. And this is, after all, what Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, Daesh, and many other organizations dream about. And Hamas has outdone Hezbollah in that sense. So they have a burden of proof, so to say, to re-qualify their credentials as the leading jihadi organization that they call Mukawama, resistance against Israel. Currently, Hamas has done more over the last, sadly, over the last few months. So they need, from a political point of view, from their positioning in the jihadi universe, to show that they are fighting against Israel. That's one thing. Second thing is they answer to the Lebanese population and they answer to the Shiite population in southern Lebanon. And they understand very clearly that if they unleash a war against Israel, Israel will, of course, retaliate. And at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, Israel will still exist, Israel will be victorious, and southern Lebanon will be in ruins. And the Dakhya in Beirut will be in ruins. And people, the Shiite population, will eventually claim accountability from Hassan Nasrallah and his henchmen. And they will ask them, why did you do this? Israel did not attack Lebanon. Israel did not attack Hezbollah. Why are you dragging Lebanon into a conflict that was started by Hamas? And I think that Hezbollah thinks about that long and hard every day. And of course, Israel helps Hezbollah think about that, I think, by indicating and sending certain messages. So that's a second component which is very important. And Hezbollah understands that they are accountable for what happens and for their actions. And I think that many in Hezbollah remember the consequences of the Second Lebanon War, the destruction, how long it took to rebuild, and how much suffering that resulted in for the Lebanese, the Shiite community in southern Lebanon. Third thing is, of course, Iran. Iran wants Hezbollah to act. Iran doesn't want to waste Hezbollah, and it doesn't want to expend this very, very precious asset that Iran has been funding for so many years. And we're talking about between $800 million and $1 billion US per year that Iran has been providing Hezbollah on a yearly basis, year by year. Iran has been providing these funds to Hezbollah, and that is what has allowed Hezbollah to become as powerful as it is. So, of course, Hezbollah answers to Iran, it answers to the Quds Force, it answers to the supreme leader in Tehran. But, as I said before, the second point, they are also accountable for towards the Lebanese population. So they're in kind of a delicate situation, and I think we can see by the activities so far of Hezbollah is that they are trying to walk that thin line. On one hand, compensating for Hamas outdoing them in barbarity and terrorism, and on the second hand, not wanting or fearing or being careful about dragging Lebanon into war. One could hope that they would do the correct strategic analysis of the situation and understand that by escalating and opening war against Israel, it would only bring destruction upon Lebanon, and that they would refrain from doing so and by themselves walk back, redeploy north of the Litani River, allow Israeli civilians to go back, and then perhaps live to see another few years of activity. Maybe Hezbollah will be smart enough to do that. Maybe not. We will see in the coming, I think, weeks. But it's anyhow a delicate situation for Hezbollah as well. Israel is not the only country under pressure here. Hezbollah is under quite significant pressure, but we must, of course, always be very humble and careful when we assess enemy intentions, what they're trying to do, and what we think that we understand that they want to do.
Very well said. Let's talk about your international media for a minute, because you defend Israel to the media over these past few months. Are you able to share with us the most challenging, difficult, or most memorable interaction that you had with the international media since the outbreak of the war?
Yeah, so I was very happy and proud to be part of a big team, the IDF Spokesperson Unit, which the IDF Spokesperson is a large unit, and in it there is the international media branch, which is headed by a very good officer, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, and there's many great reserve officers. I'm one of the reserve officers, and when the massacre on October the 7th occurred, I understood that, of course, this would mean significant combat activities. It would mean war, and I immediately reported for duty, and I served almost 90 days in reserves in the IDF Spokesperson Unit as a reserve spokesperson. Countless, I think, hundreds of interviews and briefings and engagements with top-tier media, and with very important audiences around the world, focusing on the US, but not only in the US. And I had many very interesting, some of them challenging engagements with international media. I think that in terms of activities, with the benefit of hindsight, I think a very important point in the war and in, let's say, the battle of the narrative and the information warfare that is ongoing, I think that the false claims by the Palestinians that Israel had bombed the El Ahli hospital in northern Gaza, in Gaza City, and that they tried to blame us for it, and the IDF Spokesperson Unit was relatively very quick in getting answers out and refuting that and fighting back against those false, libelous claims by Hamas, which were amplified automatically in international media. But I think that was an important waypoint, because the IDF Spokesperson Unit and Israel fought back. We did a very quick after-action review that was overseen by the highest officers in the IDF, and we were very confident about the information that we had. We were sure that it wasn't an Israeli missile or rocket. We understood quickly that it was a Palestinian rocket that had misfired, landed and exploded in the parking area, and we were confident enough to say that and to go out on record on CNN and BBC and all of the other news outlets and say that, listen, you've got the story wrong, and that you, the New York Times and BBC and many others, are doing your viewers a disservice by trusting the information that Hamas is putting out and by reporting Hamas information as if it was the truth, as if you have seen and verified it. And I think that was an important point in the war, where we made it clear that we are not going to tolerate and not going to sit idly by while international media cuts Hamas breaks after break after break, and in many times adopts the Hamas narrative. BBC did that countless times, and I've been in the public affairs world for let's say 10 years. The first time that I've seen the BBC forced to issue 2 apologies and corrections within a matter of 2 weeks was during this conflict. One about the El Ahli incident, where they admitted that they shouldn't have reported Hamas information as being correct and verified, and a second about another incident. And I think that's a good step forward, and I think that is a moment that we will take with us forward. All in all, I think that the IDF Spokesperson Unit and that Israel in general in this war, and this is not me crediting myself, I was a small part of a very big machine working. I think that the State of Israel and the IDF Spokesperson Unit, this war is operating much better than the IDF and the State of Israel has done in the past. And I think that a lot of credit is due to the people who are doing a lot of hard work, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the IDF Spokesperson Unit and many others that are helping civil society, that are up in arms, fighting, sharing information, organizations like Habitronistim and many others, friends around the world that understand how absolutely crucial it is for truth to be spoken, truth to be shared, and lies and false information to be fought and countered, and to be done so quickly. And I think that there's good things that we can see and lessons that we can implement for the future. It's a tough battle, but it's a battle just like on the ground. We have no choice but winning and fighting until we win.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Final question. Who is winning the PR war, Israel or Hamas?
Yeah, that's a big question that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. I don't think that professionally I could say that Israel is winning. I don't think that Hamas is winning either. I think that we have to zoom out and look at narratives. There's an Israeli narrative, and then there's a Palestinian narrative, which is divided into different sub-narratives. And I would say that just by sheer numbers, the amount of Muslims in the world and the amount of people in the world who have a natural disposition to be favorable of the Palestinian narrative, they create a very challenging situation for Israel to present its case and to be, let's say, persuasive and successful in winning the battle of the narratives. I think that in many cases, it's still true. Hamas narratives are parroted and propagated by international media without professional verification and scrutiny. And I could only wish and ask for and urge my esteemed colleagues in the international media, specifically US and European, to apply exactly the same standards of scrutiny, cynicism, and censor on everything that is released by Hamas and emanates from Gaza, as they do to the information that is shared by official Israeli trustworthy sources. Because the amount of times that I have heard the Israelis claim, and the Israelis say, and the Israelis allege, and that Sky couldn't independently verify, and the BBC was not able to independently verify, etc., 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 all of these different phrasings, which basically are dog whistles and signals by editors and journalists that want to convey to their audience or their consumers that you shouldn't trust this because this is the Israelis saying. But I don't see those nearly the same level of caveats and professional behavior when it comes to information that emanates from Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas, or at least used to be, where the media is dominated and controlled by Hamas oversight. And I could only wish for international media to hold us to the same standards. Actually, it would be fair to hold Hamas to different standards because they're a terrorist organization. They answer to nothing. They are not a democratic state. They don't feel bound, not by international law, not by democratic values. So I fail to understand how we're even comparable. But let's say that we are comparable, hold us to the same standards, and go through the same scrutiny when it comes to information that is relayed or generated from Gaza. That would be a great step forward, and that would do a great service for media consumers around the world in getting a better understanding, a more nuanced and developed and adult understanding of what's going on, and not the black and white, weak versus strong, poor versus I don't know, evil or powerful, that is so many times peddled to unknowing international consumers of media.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We have a guest tomorrow, Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch. So we're going to be doing some very nice analysis on what's happening in Judea and Samaria and elsewhere across Israel. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Until then, stay safe, stay strong.
Shalom.